All right, we are going to take a look at how to play hymns, and we're going to talk about filling out the sound when you're playing hymns. If you take a look here at this page of At Calvary, which is available for you to download and print, so you can practice what we're going to go over here. But what you're going to find in the hymn book is the four-part harmony: the soprano, alto, tenor, and bass parts. And when played, it doesn't sound bad, but you seldom hear people playing like that when they play in church. And so they'll fill it out. They'll give it a much more full sound by adding notes. So how do we know what to add in? How do we know how to fill it out? And to take what's written on a in a hymn book and take it to this. And so we're going to go over that: how to fill out the right hand, how to add to the left hand a little bit. So before we jump in, we need to you need to be familiar with your chords. And so when I say a certain chord, hopefully you understand. Like if I say a C chord, you understand it's a triad built off of the key off of a C note, just like this. And then of course that also implies all these other inversions as well. So when I say a C chord, you need to be familiar with this as a C chord, or this or this. And that's kind of confusing to you, then go back to our lesson on the key of C, and that'll give you a good basis, a good understanding for what we're going over here. So let's see here. Head over there if you're not up to speed here. You need to know our scales, your C scale. That's going to help you a lot, and we're going to get into some other hymns in different keys as well. So really, every time you practice, you ought to be going over your scales and all the scales you know. Ideally, you want to get to the place where you know all 12 major scales and then get into the minors, but the 12 major scales is what's going to help you with your hymns. And so you need to know all 12 major scales and be able to play them fairly comfortably. But for now, as long as you know the C scale, you'll be able to keep up with this lesson. Okay, so let's jump into, let's just take a look, and we're going to spend a lot of time analyzing this sheet here before we actually go to the keyboard. So hopefully you're able to print this off. This is important that you have in front of you. Let's go ahead and take a look at this piece of music here. At Calvary. Again, this is straight out of the hymn book, page you're going to find right out of the hymn book. So you'll see the soprano, alto, and tenor parts. And how do we analyze this and figure out what to do? First of all, this is in 4/4 time, and that's the most common time signature in music. So you want to be familiar with 4/4 time. And so in 4/4 time, there are two beats that you gotta emphasize. And if you can keep these beats, as long as you're playing what's right on these three beats, or these two beats, everything's going to come together. So the first beat and the third beat. Now what goes on in between those beats a lot of times are going to be different than the chord that we're playing on the first and third beat. But as long as the first and third beat are consistent and they're right, and we're emphasizing those, everything's going to lock into place. And I'll demonstrate that for you in just a moment. But take a look at the first measure. All right, right here. This is the first beat, and then here is the third beat right here. Now this note is coming in on the right before the fourth beat. But take a look. We're actually playing a C chord during this measure, and I'll tell you how to figure that out in just a minute. We're playing a C chord, but these notes are not in the C chord. We're playing these notes: C, E, and G. Now these notes kind of clash with these notes, right? but they pass through unnoticed, and it gives the melody movement, and it sounds great, and you don't have to worry about well, what chord is that? Well, we got the first beat, we've got the third beat, so we can play whatever we need to in between. And so just understand that as long as you gotta make sure you hit the first and third beat. You can even, if you're accompanying a singer or playing for congregational singing, you can even just play the first and the third beat, and you'll do fine. Years I spent in vanity and pride, caring not my Lord was crucified. That was just the first and third beat. That'll keep everyone together. So the first and third beat, make sure that on the first and third beat, we've got those, whatever the chord is, we're playing it on the first and third beat. So how do we figure out the chord? Well, it's kind of like learning a new language. If you have never tried to analyze a hymn and figure out the chords, there's a couple things you need to remember. Is usually the chord will stay the same throughout a measure, and sometimes for multiple measures, but at least throughout a measure. And that's usually. You're going to come across songs where the chord changes every beat. You'll come across some hymns where it changes halfway through the measure. In fact, that's common. If it doesn't stay throughout the whole measure, it'll change right in the middle of the measure. But usually the chord will stay the same throughout the whole measure. So if we can analyze hymns measure by measure, then we can learn them much more easier. So let's take a look at the first measure of At Calvary. And this bass note is a big tip-off to what is going on. The bass note, or the lowest sounding note, really defines the chord. And so the bass note is important. So what I always suggest when you play hymns is to follow the bass line. Your left hand should outline what's going on in the bass. So whatever I'm doing in the left hand, the first and third beats should have a C as the lowest sounding note, or at least the first beat. Okay, so we want to follow that bass line. We want that C to be the lowest sounding note. Outline the bass, follow the bass line with your left hand, roughly speaking. Now, you're not just going to play the bass, but I see the first measure, the lowest note is a C, so I'm going to make sure I hit that C. Definitely on the first beat. Now, I like to do this back and forth from the C and the G, and that's fine too, as long as we're getting that C in there. All right, and then you notice over here, the third measure, the lowest sounding note is a G, so we want to be hitting that on the first beat. Right? And you can even go back and forth on the first and third, like that. So that bottom note is very important. So that gives us a big clue that this is probably going to be a C chord. But you cannot just go off of one note to know what the chord is. So I encourage you to learn to look at all of these notes and figure out what they are. So this here is a C, this is a middle C, and then we have an E and a G. Now if we put all those chords together, C, all those notes together, we put C, C, E, and G. What chord do we have? It's a C chord. And it stays that way for most of the whole measure. Here it drops down, and we've only got these notes, still a C chord, and so the whole first measure is a C chord. So now we can fill in our right hand with any note from the C chord. So if you're a beginner, if you're just getting started playing hymns, then fill out your right hand by playing 3 notes in the right hand as much as possible. Okay, so the right hand would look like this. That's what's written. Now, what note from the C chord is missing in the right hand? The C. So, on the first measure, I'm going to be playing this. Now here, remember what I said about these passing tones here. we don't have to worry about figuring out, well, what chord is that? I gotta jump to here or jump to here, whatever. Just let it pass. And then you can jump down and play 3 notes here, but the less you move your hand, the better. So that's how I would do it. I would just play what's written right here and fill out those first 3 notes. Like that. And that's how you can fill out your right hand. So first, we analyze the measure. What chord? Is it the same chord throughout the whole measure? Many times it will be. And then we add the notes of that chord to our right hand to fill it out. If you're more comfortable with doing this kind of thing, then you can play a full octave chord. Now what you probably want to do is, instead of playing where it's written, move up an octave and then add the missing note and then double your top note like that. And that's a full octave chord. It gives it a real big sound. Just like that. Alright, that's the first measure. Giving you some tips and tricks for filling out your right hand and how to fill out and to know what to play when you play hymns. We're going to go ahead and pause right here and jump in with more on the next lesson.